think I skipped this.
Hey, good morning. Nice to see most of you. Now you're wondering, me? No, not me. No, it's good to see everybody. Hey, if you're a guest today, welcome. My name is Ryan. I'm the lead pastor here. I got to meet one family that came in, brand new, little guy, James, wearing the coolest fedora. It was awesome. So awesome. So if you are a guest today, thank you so much for being here today. Love to answer any questions you might have, either right after the service or inside of that program is my cell phone number. It is really my cell phone number. It's not some fake thing. So if you send me a text message, I'll respond and we can set up and have coffee. Raise your hand up nice and high if you've ever done that. And we've actually set up coffee together. So if you're a guest, I'm not making it up. That's why I do that. So you can see people around you. And I do make you pay. I'm not going to lie. No, I'm just kidding. And if you don't like coffee, we can always do whiskey. I can thank this church for turning me into a whiskey drinker. I had never had whiskey until I worked here. I want that to be known. And it really was not until I met Nick Miller. Nick, if you're tuning in online, it's your fault. So it is good to be here, though. I know my soul is happy this morning to be together. And we're gonna work through our way through our last week of this Bending Our Hearts series. I don't know about you, but my Lent journey has not turned out the way I thought it was going to be at the beginning of Lent. Many of you know we had a tragedy in our family over this past few weeks, and so thank you for those of you that have so graciously brought over meals and helped us. And Wendy had surgery yesterday, and many of you have asked how she's doing. Thank you very much. She's doing well, no complications, just recovery and pain and all that stuff. But thank you very much for those of you. I was saying it's interesting how, I know how people walk through difficulties in life without community. It's very difficult, but I'm just super appreciative of community and being a part of a place that just loves and cares for one. It's why groups are important, especially in a place kind of this big. You get to know some folks and people can care for one another. That really is the heartbeat of it. So thank you very much. But like I was saying, if you're a guest, just send me a text message and I'd love to meet and answer any questions you might have. And I've got a feeling if you're a guest, you might have some questions when this is all done, because I might not be what you expect in a person that you call pastor, but that's okay. All right. Got a question for you as we kick off things this morning. It is Palm Sunday. I know we don't actually wave palm branches, but let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever worked with somebody? You got to loosen up. I want you to raise your hand. If you're tuning in online, get ready to just give me a thumbs up in the chat or say yes or something like that. But have you ever worked with or maybe worked for someone who lived out the phrase, let the power go to their head? That's probably me, right? Has anybody ever worked in that environment? Raise your hand up nice and high. Like when I say you know exactly what I mean. So what comes into your mind, just think it inside of your head. You don't have to say it out loud. We're not one of those churches, really. I mean, some of you give me an amen every now and then. I appreciate it, but it can get weird. What comes to your mind when you think of that person, right? Do you think to yourself, oh, I want to have lunch with them? I hope for our lunch break, they come up to me and say, hey, Ryan, do you want to go have lunch? No, we generally don't think that, right? We kind of want to avoid that in a sense, right? We definitely don't want to have that person around us, right? And what's interesting is as people, we tend to struggle with differentiating and understanding the differences between power, authority, and influence. Okay, so now I've said that statement, and I'm going to have to ask you to really lean in today. Because today, as we chat and talk, and by that I mean as I talk at you, the concept today is a little tricky. And so this isn't necessarily the feel good, but it really, you kind of got to lean in. Because we're going to be talking about this today, the nuances and the way in which these three words and concepts play together as it relates to what Palm Sunday teaches us, all right? So you got to kind of lean in with me, and we'll start with just kind of laying out some foundations here. So when we say power, right, what is power, right? Where power, the word refers to the ability for somebody or maybe a group to exert control or influence over others, right? And other people's actions. That's the idea of power. And power can come from lots of different places, right? Power can come from physical strength. You can be strong enough to physically withhold someone. You could have a measure of wealth and use your wealth to hold control over someone or influence. Knowledge, social status, institutional position, like you have a title, right? And this power, like it then manifests in different ways, right? There's coercive power, right? Using force or threats. Parenting 101, right? If I'm honest, I'm not saying I was a good one, but right? We do that. There's reward power, right? We offer the incentives. There's legitimate power, which is based on like you have a legitimate role or an authority. You're an authority figure in our lives. And then there's something called referent power, which is this idea of your charisma or your people are drawn to you, right? Now, power is this general concept. So think of it as a big bucket. It's a general concept. And here's what I want you to think of. I want you to think of the speed limit. How many of y'all drive? How many of y'all follow the speed limit all the time? Liars, liars, liars. You're trying to tell me you don't accidentally. But no, the speed limit, right? So the speed limit is a form of power in our lives. It exerts some control over us. So hang on to that image, the speed limit, okay? Now, that's power. So let's talk about authority, all right? Let's talk about authority. That's for the South Park fans in here, sorry. I've never, ever seen an episode of South Park, okay? I don't watch that trash. All right, now listen. What is authority and how does it relate to power? Okay, so authority, it's hitting puberty on stage, which is awesome. Authority is a very specific type of power, right? And it's granted or given or recognized and it's legitimated by an individual or by a group of people, okay? So it's typically associated with more formal things like a position in a hierarchical structure at work or a government official, right? A manager, religious leaders. I don't know if you know this or not, but over the last 2,500 years, religious leaders have sometimes used their authority for not so good things, right? But that's kind of like an official thing. And so we tend to comply with authority figures, right? And not only because of coercion or incentives, but also because we kind of perceive them as having the right to make a decision or issue some sort of a command within a certain domain of our lives. So we kind of just like honor that authority. So you have a boss at work, and whether you think they're charismatic or nice, that boss tells you to do something and you go, okay, I would love to do that. And then you go and find a coworker and complain about your boss, right? Let's just be honest. So we kind of do these things. Now, so authority inside of this big concept of power is a type of power. Now think of that the speed limit, you have a police officer. Okay, so police officer is a type of authority within that power structure. You have traffic court. Anybody ever been to traffic court? Come on now. It's church. You can be honest. No judgment here. It's a judgment-free zone, right? I'm not going to judge you for going to traffic court. Goodness gracious, I can't imagine what you judge me for. So listen, traffic court is kind of an authority of sorts. Traffic cameras. Anybody ever gotten a speeding ticket and you didn't know it until a week later? Yeah, that just happened to me. What the heck? How is that even legal? It's like, is this commune? No, I'm just kidding. I can't argue with it. I was speeding. Okay, so there's traffic cameras, right? And then there's even things like the insurance company, right? How many of you, your insurance rates ever gone up because of your poor driving, right? I said poor driving later in the conversation. You raised your hand and you just admitted it in front of your partner. So, sorry. Right, so these are all like authority types. Now let's talk about influence. What is influence? Now influence is the capacity, right? The ability for someone or something to affect our thoughts or our beliefs or our behaviors without relying on authority. Okay, let me say it again. So influence is this idea, it's a type of power in which people can change and shape one another, our beliefs, our behaviors, and it does not rely on having a formal authority or a coercive nature. So unlike power and authority, influence can be exerted through persuasion, negotiation, social connections. How many of y'all have had a friend that had a hobby and you were like, that looks like fun, and then you started doing it? Anybody ever done that? Like, that's influence, right? I know this isn't a tricky concept, and some of you are like, why did I come to church today? This is absurd. Can we get to the music? I get it. We'll be there in just a moment, okay? But influence doesn't necessarily rely on authority. It relies on things like trust and credibility, a relationship, right? And as individuals, we're far more likely to be influenced by those that we think of as knowledgeable or trustworthy or similar to ourselves, right? So power is the big bucket. Authority is kind of granted, institutional, title-based, but influence, right? Influence is different. Influence is outside of authority necessarily, right? So think of things like this: a speed limit sign, right? A speed limit sign is an inanimate object, but it influences you, right? It just influences you. It reminds you. Let's go to like a spouse or a partner who's riding with you in the car. They cannot give you a ticket. I don't know if you know this or not, right? Like, they can't pull you over and say, I'm sorry, Jim, did you know how fast you were driving? Like, that would be funny though, if you could, right? If your spouse was like, pull it over. They pull out their phone and like put on like a siren, and then they got out of the car and they walked up and they were talking to you like they were funny. But you can't do that, right? But how many of y'all have ever had your speed influenced by your spouse? Yeah. You're driving too slow, you're driving too fast, whatever it might be, right? You know, another person of influence that has very little authority institutionally, it would be a child. You ever have a child with you driving who's starting to like figure driving out, and they go, how fast are we going? Right? Or a car seat, right? A car seat that can influence us. Now, here's why these concepts are important, because we live in a world with leadership, and we live in a world with oppression. And what happens is this. So today, as we walk through this, we're going to talk about this idea of power and justice and injustice. And I don't want to get caught up in all the injustices in the world, okay? That's one direction we could go. What I want to talk about today is what I think is a massive driving force for whether it's the macro or the micro injustices of our world. So whether it's the injustice that we experience in our homes from a parent, a spouse, a sibling, whatever it might be, to our work, to the injustices that create poverty, to the injustices that create systemic violence, that create systemic racism, right? There's something that I think sits underneath all of it, and it's the relationship of these three concepts. If you're with me so far, type 1 in the chat or raise your hand up and wave at me if you're with me, okay? All right, good. I understand that I might be the only person interested in this topic in here right now. I get it, okay. So, when authority leverages power for influence, okay? So think about it. When a person with some type of authority that's been given to them leverages the idea of power to influence, leadership becomes oppression. There's a lot in there, okay? When authority leverages power for influence, leadership becomes oppression. Think about your worst parenting moment. Maybe not your worst one. Let's think of like maybe a top, bottom 10, all right? Come up a little bit. This happens in parenting all the time because we have so much authority in the lives of our young children. And we want them to do what we know is healthy for them. And we want that, or I should say what we believe is healthy for them. And we want it so badly, and we think of it that oftentimes we will slip and move, and we will have this authority as a parent, and we will leverage our power to influence that behavior, and our parenting will become oppressive if you're a parent. If you're not a parent, ignore that analogy. I apologize. Does that make sense? Like, just at a real, like, bodily level, could you feel that story as a parent? Like, have you ever felt like, wow, I think I might have moved into an oppressive parenting schema there? little phrases that many of us have said, like, because I said so, is a micro idea of it, right? You're not going to damage your child forever for saying, because I said so, I don't think. But that's the idea, right? When I can raise my voice and I can induce fear, I can leverage that I'm the one in charge, that I'm the one in control, right? My parenting becomes oppressive. And this is the driving force behind oppressive leaders who prefer control over influence. Right? This is what drives injustice. So think of Dwight Schrute. Any Office fans out there, right? Assistant regional manager versus assistant to the regional manager, right? Probably the worst thing that could ever happen to Dwight Schrute and everyone around him was for him to actually be the assistant regional manager, right? That's what happens. And this is the temptation in all of us. Anytime we have a measure of authority given to us, it exists everywhere. It was the temptation for the authority in Jesus's life, in his part of the world, of his day, and it is the same temptation and it is the same struggle in our world today that produces oppression. And it is the temptation of your life and my life too. We ought not to think that we're beyond power being intoxicating. Y'all ever heard that phrase that the power is intoxicating, right? Or power is a corruptive, corrosive force, right? And it's in all of us because every person who's watching online, if you're still with me online, type yes in the chat. Every person who's sitting in here, every person who's on demand, driving the speed limit right now because you heard that analogy and now you're thinking, how fast am I driving? Every one of us, we have a measure of power granted to us. We have a measure of authority, whether it's at work, at home, relationally. And Palm Sunday offers us some wisdom because during the Passover week of Jesus' life, he organized 2 nonviolent demonstrations. And they were targeted at power structures and authority that had become oppressive. One was religion and one was Rome. And in the video you might have seen if you were here on time, some of you are like, you try and get 2 kids here on time. I totally get it. I'm just teasing you, okay, right? You can go back and watch it online, right? So he stages these 2 demonstrations because both of these, religion and Rome, were essentially a very economically oppressive system. Religion was creating a class of people known as sinners. You see that in the New Testament. And they were called sinners because ultimately they couldn't afford the double taxation of Rome and religion, right? The tithe was tax. That's what it was, okay? And they couldn't afford both of them, so they would pay Rome and they'd be excluded from the temple. And they'd be pushed to the margins. And you had people who had sicknesses and they'd be pushed to the margins as well. And you have this Roman oppression and occupation, you've got religion all weighing in, and you have this feast that takes place. And so Jesus, the first demonstration that he staged, I believe this historically, I don't believe that Jesus accidentally did this. I agree with Dr. Borg that this was not like, oh, I've got to fulfill this prophecy that I read. I think Jesus was very intentionally doing this. And I think it cost him his life, these 2 things. He stages this and he enters into Jerusalem to demonstrate that the power of Rome was not the power of God. Right? So he stages this, and we read about it in Matthew chapter 21, and it's referring to this book in what we call the Hebrew scriptures, Zechariah chapter 9. And so there's 2 entrances, as our video said, into Jerusalem that week. Maybe even on the same day. One on the west, the Roman governor would come in, swords ablazing, spears ablazing, the Roman symbol for peace ablazing, the Pax Romana, the reminder that this is how we have established peace on earth. These phrases are all political. And it was a reminder, don't get out of hand during Passover, because we are here to make sure the peace is kept. And that was the procession. And it was in the face. And anybody who was anybody, if you had all the wealth, if you had the power, if the system worked for you, you would have been in there welcoming Rome, right? Meanwhile, from the east, Jesus comes riding in on a donkey to demonstrate this idea of a king of peace that's found in Zechariah, right? This passage that was not written to talk about Jesus, but was written to talk about a leader that would arise in the time of Israel, but represented the ideal of God, and Jesus becomes the picture of the true fulfillment of it. It says, exalt greatly, O daughter Zion, shout for joy, O daughter Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, a just Savior is he. Humble and riding on a donkey, this is an important line, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He shall banish the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. The warriors, I love this line. The warrior's bow will be banished and he will proclaim peace to the nations. Right? It's the beating of swords, weapons and instruments of violence and oppression into plowshares, weapons and instruments that are feeding. Isn't that awesome? That's so good. And it says, his dominion will be from sea to sea, and he will proclaim from the river to the ends of the earth, right? This is what Jesus is now. So Jesus wasn't like Marcus, he wasn't just fulfilling this, but he was reenacting, demonstrating it for everyone to see. I don't agree with Rome. I think they're off base. This power system is jacked up. So he gets everybody and he rides in. And Matthew 21, verse 1 through 10 says, when they had come near to Jerusalem and had reached Bethpage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples. And he said to him, hey, go to the village ahead of you, and immediately you'll find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them both to me. Get the image in your head because it's kind of funny. I'm leading up to a joke, okay? Pay attention because it's a pretty funny one if you ask me. All right? And it's going to help illuminate why you should not read the Bible literally, but you should read it as a beautiful metaphor for life, okay? So here's the thing. He goes, get me both. Get me the donkey and the colt. Bring them both. And if anyone says to you, what are you doing? Just say, the Lord needs them. Who's going to argue with that? And they'll give them to you. And that's what happens, right? And it says this took place, Matthew says, to fulfill what the prophet said. So he quotes Matthew, the writer of Matthew, quotes Zechariah. Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming soon to you, humble and mounted on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So Matthew doesn't understand Hebrew poetry. He thinks that the prophecy means he's going to ride both. When Hebrew poetry always is like, yes and really yes. Like it's called parallelism. And so there's this emphasis of what in the Hebrew, but Matthew doesn't know that. So he's like telling the story of Jesus, and he goes, Jesus is going to ride in on both. Matthew's the only one who has Jesus riding in on both the colt and the donkey. So you just have to picture Jesus riding both of them. Riding both of them so Zechariah could be fulfilled accurately in Matthew's text, okay? Which I always find funny. Like maybe he did side saddle on one, grab the other one, I don't know. But it says the disciples went and did just as they asked, as Jesus had asked, and they brought the donkey and the colt, and they put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them, Matthew says. Come on now, peeps. Let's not have our faith be shattered because Jesus did not ride in on both the donkey and the colt. Jesus wasn't a literalist from Scripture. We know that, right? I mean, Jesus took great liberty, okay? So, but this is Matthew, right? Trying to make sure that his Jewish audience understands that Jesus is the fulfillment of this image of the King of Peace, all right? So this very loud crowd, they spread their cloaks down on the ground, and they cut the palm branches down, and they wave them, and the crowds went ahead, and they shouted, and they were saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, which was basically saying, Hosanna to the King. That was what was basically the Son of David would be understood as the next king in the line of David. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest heaven. And then it says this, when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil. Check the box demonstration worked, right? Like that's the whole point of a demonstration is to upset the apple cart. And that's what Jesus did. The whole city is set in turmoil. So demonstration served its purpose. So Jesus enters into Jerusalem as a demonstration against Rome. Now he makes another entrance, and I promise I'm going to go fast, okay? His second entrance that he either did that day or later on in the week, depending upon which gospel, but he enters the temple to demonstrate that the power of religion is not the power of God. So he enters Jerusalem, and that demonstration is to signal, hey, the power, the way that Rome thinks about power, that's not the kingdom of God. But also I'm going to enter the temple to demonstrate that the way religion thinks about God isn't right either. The way that religion thinks about power isn't the power of God. So Matthew 21, the very next passage in Matthew, so for Matthew, these happen bang, bang, right? Like Jesus goes on lunch break and gets off both the donkey and the foal is like, good job, smacks the donkey. They go away, both of them. Jesus kind of walking it off because that is going to hurt, right? And both of them at the same time. Takes a little break and then he goes, I got to enter the temple now. So Matthew chapter 21, verse 12 through 16, it says, then Jesus entered the temple and he drove out all who were selling and buying in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. So what's going on here, in case you're not familiar? The laws of the temple at the time would require only certain money could be used. So you couldn't use money that had an image on it of Rome. Couldn't do it. So you had to go and exchange that money. So think of like if you went and traveled to another nation, they're not going to take the they'll take the US dollar, most of the ones, but they're going to exchange it, right? And you're going to get an exchange rate. So what would happen is that these folks would be taking advantage of those who had to exchange money, giving them a very poor rate, let's say. And if you didn't have the right sacrifice that you were coming for at Passover, like if you traveled a long distance and you didn't want to bring along your sacrifice, you could come and buy certain sacrifices that would replace it, and they would sell those at exorbitant prices, all right? So what was happening was Jesus knew this because he grew up outside of Jerusalem. He probably had visited a few times. His gang of people that he hung out with were around the Sea of Galilee, a place where there was intense pressure from Rome. They're probably commercializing fishing. There's all kinds of taxes. So Jesus is very much aware of this. So he goes in the temple. He turns over the tables in one section. He casts them out, and he recognizes that the temple was a place where injustice was safe. Think about that. That religion had made injustice safe. When he says it was a den of robbers, it wasn't like necessarily this place where you went to just do injustice, but it was a safe haven, right? It was like the bat cave where you could go and be safe as a person of injustice and actually do it in the open air. They would just go and live and exist in the temple. But what was happening is the victims, the sinners, the marginalized, they were outside. So what does Jesus do? I love it. We don't ever get this. We don't ever teach this. We stop right there. So Jesus, what does he do? He goes in to where everybody's at in the outer court, turns over the temples, and then he goes right up next to the oppressed and the marginalized, gets right up close to them. Because it says this, the blind and the lame, they came to him in the temple. Not outside the temple, in the temple, and he cured them. The demonstration was not just the turning of the tables over, which certainly got the eye of Rome. I mean, they saw this all happen. But what really got the eye of religion was when Jesus started curing the sinners. When Jesus started loving the ones that nobody wanted to love. And that caught the eye of the leaders. That caught the eye of those who lived a life built on injustice, not even that they intentionally did it. And the text says that when the chief priests and when the scribes saw the amazing things that he did and heard the children continuing the chant of those who followed Jesus in Hosanna to the Son of David, when they heard all of this, they got angry. And they said to Jesus, do you hear what they're saying? And Jesus, still a little sore from riding both the donkey and the colt, he says, oh yeah. And haven't you ever heard that out of the mouths of infants and nursing babes, you have prepared praise for yourself? That it's in these words that the God of the powerless and the marginalized and the oppressed is found. That the Son of David, the one riding, the King of Peace, comes to say that the power of Rome and religion is the problem, not the solution. It had blinded the leadership of Rome. It had blinded them to their unjust ways. It had blinded the religious leaders to the injustice of the actual system that was meant to help people. But this is nothing new because it happens in our work, in our homes, and our cities all around the world every day. And unless we live with a consistent, a constant disposition towards servant leadership and an honest belief that power can corrupt me as beautiful and brilliant as I am, as long as I can live with that disposition, then if I don't live like that, if I don't honor that reality, if I don't get the danger of power and authority and control, if I don't believe that, then power will ultimately break me and it will break our world. And so our final prayer, which I think is the prayer at the very heartbeat of the two demonstrations of Jesus, is this: bend my heart towards justice so power doesn't break me. Because that's the truth of it. That's the rub. Power that leverages and uses authority becomes oppression, and that's where injustice flourishes. And Jesus says, this is not the way of God. This is not the power of God. So in your everyday normal life, how do you live this out? Well, I want to encourage you, make an entrance like Jesus. When you're given authority, when you have leadership, make an entrance like Jesus. When you enter that space, remember that you have the privilege to lead, and remember to lead well. Remember to lead with influence and not authority, whatever situation you're in. And so remember these few things as you enter that room. Make your entrance. Ride on your donkey and your colt. Get full on bow-legged here as you do this, all right? So what does this mean? Recognize that power is intoxicating for everyone. I don't care how often you read your Bible. I don't care how much money you give in the donations. So that's not true. I care a lot about that. But like God doesn't, you know. It doesn't matter. You are not exempt from this. I am not exempt from this. Power is intoxicating. It is. And so we have to, when we walk into those spaces, we have to remember that. And then I love this phrase that I've seen a lot around. I see it on t-shirts and I see it on mugs, and it says, speak truth to power even if your voice shakes. I love that. But I want to twist it a little bit. I want you to speak truth to the power that's inside of you that's trying to turn into oppression, that's trying to hold on to its privilege, that's trying, right? And I want you, with your quivering voice, to speak truth to it, to say that this power has no space in my life. You know, like the old school, like Ricky was funny. If you were here on Football Sunday, my friend Ricky, he said in his prayer, he was like, we just speak against the demons. So he like went full on, you know, and like obviously he and I have some differing theologies on stuff, which is fun, and we have lots of great conversations, but the metaphor works, right? Like I grew up in that environment too, that was like, we're just gonna cast out the devils and we're gonna speak over the name of Jesus. And when I grew up in all that, right? The metaphor works, right? That I have to speak truth to the power that's inside of me. That's this festering disease that wants me to be in charge and be right and get everybody to do what I want to say, that loves control and hates influence. So I speak not only truth to the power that is oppressive, but I have to speak that truth to me. Otherwise, I just become a scapegoater and I just start crucifying and blaming everybody else for the problems that I would never create. And in doing that, I want to encourage you to then, if we're not gonna like hold on to our power, I don't know, I read a verse somewhere, I talked about somebody who gave up everything and became a servant. Who was that? Oh, that's right, that was Jesus. Who, being the very nature of God, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but set aside all of it and humbled himself even to death on a cross, to demonstrate what the real power of God is like in our world. And that's a guy worth following. And so if that's where we are, I want to encourage us, what do we got to do? Then we've got to leverage love and service to gain influence. That's what we do. That's what it is. We use our voice when it shakes. I don't doubt that Jesus' voice didn't shake as he stood before Pilate. I don't doubt that Jesus' voice didn't shake as they nailed him to that cross. But his belief in the true nature of God and love and power was worth it to Jesus. Because he leveraged love and service and gained influence, and he has changed the world because of it. And if we'll do this in our everyday normal lives as parents, as spouses, as partners, as coworkers, as bosses, as employees, what will happen is we will become a person who empowers and a person who is effective in leadership. Why? Because empowering and effective leadership flourish when we understand the interplay between power, authority, and influence. And when empowerment and effective leadership flourishes, you know what decreases? Injustice. Any kind, any type, any which way. We could get into the 5 unacceptable truths, and we're going to walk through those on Friday night as a part of Good Friday, and we're going to talk about the crosses that we continue to crucify people on, and we're going to meditate on that, and then we're going to find hope in communion, and we're going to accept our responsibility for the death of Jesus as a metaphor and what that means for us. Because empowering and effective leadership that's built on service and love, injustice, it will decrease no matter what it is. So today, as we wrap up, we're going to have communion together. If you're a guest today, we share in what's called communion every Sunday. Yeah, today's Sunday. I'm a little backward. And we practice what's called open communion, which means everybody is welcome to the table. Doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are. Doesn't matter what you believe about the universe or God or one another. Because for us, this is a statement about what God, the universe, the wholeness, the fullness of being, whatever word you like to use, what it means for us, and that is that everyone belongs. That everyone has a place at this table. I love our song that we started with, that we're going to finish with, that says, love has a bigger table. And so everybody is welcome to come during this song and receive communion as an acknowledgement that what we call God and the love that we seek to demonstrate involves everyone. And in the sacrifice of Jesus, in the brokenness of his body, in the shedding of his blood, we have been given a beautiful picture of the very nature of God. The very nature of reality, and that nature empowers us, and we eat the flesh and we drink the blood, which is kind of a gross metaphor, I get. But in it, we find life. Literally, we find life. We find empowerment for the next week to go out and love and serve, to forgive our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us, to recognize that wounded people wound people, and I'm a wounded person, and I have to find healing for that and forgiveness for that, and so does everybody else. And so you're invited to the table. If you're at tables, they're served at the table as well. So when we choose to follow Jesus in this path of justice and service, we become the people the world is looking for. And I love that we're going to do this song for communion today. That the world is looking for people who will lead like this, who will serve like this. And today, as you receive these elements, I hope it's a time of commitment for you to say, I'm not going to do it perfectly, but yeah, I'm going to go riding in on both the colt and the donkey, and we're going to make a big splash. And I'm going to love and I'm going to serve, and it may cost me my job. It might cost me my finances. There's a cross to bear in this, but I'm going to love my enemies, and I'm going to forgive those who persecute me, and I'm going to recognize that there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain in our world, and I'm going to let that drive me and nourish me. And that's my commitment this Lent season, as a culmination on Palm Sunday as we head into the week. So I invite you to stand. We're going to sing this song, We're the People we've been waiting for. And we are those peacemakers. We are those people that can go into our world and we can present a different way of seeing power and having power, and not looking for control, but influence through service and love. Let's sing this together and have communion.